1st today marks the 20 years since the disappearance of two 10-year-old schoolgirls made the headlines across the nation.
Well, criminologist David Wilson followed the story closely at the time, and he's here alongside former detective Chief Inspector Martyn Underhill, who was a part of the team who brought the murderer Ian Huntley to justice. Now, it's horrible to go back here. It sort of had a chill when the brief arrived this morning. David, remind us what happened on that August evening when those two girls went missing.
Sure. Of course, the events leading up to the murders of Holly and Jessica are actually rather banal, rather ordinary, something that we can all identify with as parents who've got children. Jessica Chapman and her family had been on holiday. That 4th of August was a Sunday. They had come back from holiday. Jessica wanted to go round to her best friend's Holly's house in Red Close Drive. She went round to play with her best friend. There was a barbecue at the Wellses. The children, Holly and Jessica, changed sometime about 3 o'clock into wearing the Manchester United T-shirts. And we saw that iconic image, didn't we, Rochelle, of them dressed in the Manchester United T-shirts. And if you saw, there was a clock behind it. When Holly's mum takes the photograph, it's almost a freeze frame of the time, because we know just a few hours later they would be dead. There was a barbecue. They participated in the barbecue, then they went back into Holly's bedroom to play, and then both of them, without telling anybody, left their home to go and get sweets at the local sports centre about 6:15 in the evening. On their journey back from the sports centre, they pass Ian Huntley's home in College Close. They knew that Ian Huntley's then girlfriend, a woman called Maxine Carr, was the school assistant at their primary school. So there was some exchange of information. And the next thing that we know definitively is at 6:46, Jessica's mobile phone gets turned off. And that's when we presume by that stage they are dead. There's a 13-day investigation, and that 13-day investigation allows a lot of the journalists to come into the town, doesn't it? I know you were there, Tosh, so I know him as Tosh, so forgive me. Allows a lot of the journalists to come into the town, and 13 days later, the bodies of the two girls would be found.
Martyn, you joined the investigation 2 days into it. That mobile phone being switched off was pivotal to the investigation, because when you turn off a mobile phone, it sends a signal to the nearest mast, doesn't it?
It does. I was involved in running the Sarah Payne case 2 years before. These cases are really rare. And we were asked by Cambridgeshire Police to come along and give advice. It's interesting because Soham is a town of 10,000 people. And
a tight community.
Really tight community. Everybody knew these two girls. They were gregarious, they were joined at the hip, they were best friends. And the whole village and the police force, 1,100 cops in Cambridgeshire, tiny police force, were all traumatised by this, as indeed Sussex was 2 years before when I ran the Sarah Payne case. So I went there to try and give some advice. How do you search 100 square miles of rural land? How do you deal with 1,000 calls a day coming into your control centre and pick out the nugget that's going to solve the case? Which ultimately happened because people were phoning in from Grimsby when Huntley did his interview, we're going to talk about in a moment, saying, I know that man. So you've got to pick those ones out. We called it flower sifting. So I was there to help them with a strategy because it's such an unusual case. Sarah Payne, the Soham murders, Dr. Shipman, the Ripper, they're right up there because they changed society's values and they changed the way police investigate murders.
We've got a clip of that interview that you speak of. Let's have a little look. And little did we know at that point that the killer was in plain sight all along.
And isn't it like a fairy tale? Because he's the caretaker who, of course, doesn't take care, but murders. What's interesting about that interview is that when you lie, there's a greater... it takes greater brain concentration. So there's a slight lag between your physical movements and what you're actually saying. And you can see that somehow there's a disconnect between he wants to direct your gaze to where the children supposedly went. But of course, he knows the children didn't go there because he killed them. So there's that slight lag in terms of him moving and taking you towards where they were supposedly gone. It's interesting also that murderers, I'm sure Tosh agrees, often like to insert themselves into the centre, into the drama of the unfolding narrative of the investigation. There's a huge degree of narcissism among some of these people that are desperate to be front and centre. It somehow makes them seem important and powerful in a way that they don't feel they've been important and powerful in other aspects of their lives.
Was there any CCTV in the investigation? Because the girls went to the local leisure centre to use the vending machine to get some sweets or some fizzy drinks, and then they walked back, and that's when they bumped into Ian Huntley. Was any of it on camera?
Yes, it was. There were two really key CCTV moments which helped the police plot the timeline, as we call it. But yeah, David's absolutely right. This guy, I mean, he was judged to be of normal character. He didn't have a behavioural deficit like schizophrenia or whatever, but he was misogynist, he was domineering. We now know that he committed 6 rapes up in Grimsby, charged with 1, and that was discontinued. And actually, he slipped through the net by changing his name to Nixon. So, sadly, we'll never bring Jessica and Holly back, but the legacy is that policing has changed the way it investigates these crimes. The Bichard inquiry changed the way we vet people. It changed the way police share information about people who aren't convicted but are suspected of crimes. And it changed the way that actually senior investigating officers like myself were trained. So, sadly, these 2 girls are gone. They would have been 30 this year. They could have had their own families this year. It's a tragedy we all remember, but it has changed how policing UK deals with these crimes.
As you say, it's still, you know, it still hits as shocking as it did on day one. Huntley remains in prison now, doesn't he?
Yes, he's got a 40-year tariff. He didn't get a whole life tariff. He's got a 40-year tariff. He's got another 20 years to do. And of course, we've just heard Sarah Payne mentioned. The big thing to appreciate the difference between what happens to Sarah Payne and what happens to Holly and Jessica is that Sarah Payne was abducted by a stranger. This was somebody living in plain sight in the heart of a community who had accepted that person into their community. On average, only 6 people per year, only 6 children per year are abducted by strangers. The dangers to children are not stranger dangers. That's the other big message that stories like this should come from. The big dangers to children are from people that they know.
Absolutely.
Oh, goodness me.
Gentlemen, thank you for coming in and sharing your stories. And thankfully, like you said, this investigation did enable the police to change the way that they investigate these kind of things for the better.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so very much.